How are the three articles we've read different from each other in tone and purpose?
In the three stories we read, the tone and purpose has changed quite a bit. The first article we read talked about abolishing the Indian Act. Palm Parter comes off in her writing as very aggressive and straight to the point. She stays very serious and does not mislead at all. Nothing in the act permits the federal government to racially discriminate First Nations at all. Those are racist decisions made by people in government. She makes her point come off strong. She also makes her ideas very clear, saying that the act should never be destroyed unless Indigenous peoples are able to make their own rights and does not one size fits all. She wants the government to have almost no say in the decisions and wants the plans to be made without the federal government pursuing them. Emma McClosh's tone comes off much calmer. She lists her evidence and makes known well that the pipeline is illegal and trespassing on Sowetan land. Coastal GasLink is trespassing. Those cops are trespassing. They have no jurisdiction to violence on Indigenous peoples and Indigenous youth on stolen land. The last article comes off very upset and mad. Lauren Keenish to Bass. She comes off wanting to be matter of fact and pushing back on the things said, not just by the government, but also by people. One of these people made the movie Where the Spirit Lives, gave a horrible insight on what actually happens in Indigenous schools. After being confronted, she tells the people to make their own movies. And what about the teacher who was removed from the residential schools for abusing children? He was simply sent to another, more remote school. Though the articles are very different, they speak on the wrongful actions taken out by people in the government.
What is the most surprising, eye-opening thing that you've learned in the past 2 weeks?
The most surprising thing I've learned in the last 2 weeks is hard to answer. I have learned much about whether it is cruelty or suppression of voice. But honestly, I think the most surprising thing to me is the more recent events, such as the pipeline. The fact that the government still to this very day cannot honor their rights given to Indigenous people is crazy to me. Last year, the RCMP violently arrested West Sowetan people and supporters in the disputed area. With the Guardian report late last year, the police have been permitted to use lethal force. The land may have been cleared for putting the pipeline, but still, protesting is legal. Trespass is illegal, but when the land is yours, you can't trespass on your own land, regardless of what other people say. That's like being told by your next door neighbor that you can't go in your own backyard because of their own personal preferences.
Why has perspective been important to consider when reading and discussing our last topics in the last 2 weeks?
Perspective has been proven to be very important because without perspective, you can never see the full picture. Say with history, for example, winning a battle is almost always told from the victor, not the loser. It's easy for the government to say that Indigenous peoples died from disease in residential schools, but it's very different hearing from the Indigenous people that they were neglected, abused, and they have severe trauma from the mouths of the survivors. Perspective is important, as you may understand a little bit more. But what kind of things are we missing from not having the full picture? Well, for one, you may know that teachers and nuns in Indigenous schools taught kids and made them more civilized. But did you know that they would also beat kids and forcibly made them only speak English? Some even tell of having pins stuck through their tongues as punishment for speaking their own native language. Such horrible things were happening, and the average Canadian was completely unaware. I believe these actions that were taken out were one of the biggest disappointments in Canadian history.
What are 3 questions that have arisen for you based on the materials we've discussed up to this point?
1. The 3 big questions that have come to me are why do these problems still exist? 2. Even so, the government cannot recognize the big parts of Indigenous land. Why? 3. Why can't the government and Indigenous people come together to make an agreement and get rid of the Indian Act?
If you had to write down the big idea or main point of the last 2 weeks of material, what would it be?
What do I personally think the main idea of the last few weeks has been? Well, I would have to say it's not right to take advantage of people. People only take so much before they break. Racism, neglect, and trauma destroy people's lives. The government has hurt Indigenous people for many years. Finally, these people want to take back what's theirs. Perhaps not just what's theirs, but also to expose the racism and the actions and the neglect even to this day. Orange Shirt Day and Truth and Reconciliation are great examples. Canada to this day is still unable to keep their word. Hundreds of people on reserves in Canada are still without clean water. Indigenous women are 4 times more likely to be murdered in Canada. 16% of homicide cases, compared to only 4% of the population, is a huge increase. There are many problems that we have not been able to solve or even talk about. Why? Why do people always think their way of living is the best? Is the big question. Thank you.